Welcome to another episode of the Scottish Property Podcast. My name's Nick Ponte. I'm joined by my co-host Stephen Clark. How you doing, Stephen?
Good, Nick. How you doing?
Yeah, excellent. And we've got a great interview lined up for today.
Yeah, so we've got on Doug MacSween from 91 BC factoring, which is a hot topic with investors because everyone there's no one that's kind of on the fence. People either hate them or they like them. There's no one kind of just sitting quite easy. And we've had this debate before in a couple of our lives that we've done on the Facebook group page during lockdown, didn't we? And we were at the opposite end of the spectrum as well. They're more common in Glasgow and are in the areas that I invest in, but the stuff that I've had experience from in Aberdeen, they weren't very good experiences. They're very stuffy people to deal with, and like you don't seem to get the service, and there's big markups on it, and there's a kind of perception that they just kind of rip off the owners off the buildings that they're managing. But you've got a different opinion.
Yeah, so it was funny listening to Dougie. It was a good interview. There was a bit of humour in there as well, and he's quite he understands it. He understands it. He'll be faced with the same arguments all the time. People that have this kind of hate campaign against factors, and what do they do for their money, and just an absolute rip-off and all the rest of it. He kind of compares them to being a traffic warden. So that's what he says, that it's almost up there with one of the worst jobs. And when he goes to a party, he's ashamed to admit that he's a factor, or he just comes up with something else. He just pretends that he does some other job just to kind of avoid it.
His business concept was really, really good, and it was basically based on the software that they created to kind of get around the solutions, or to find a solution for the whole factoring industry. So they kind of became factors by accident, but it sounds like they have solved a kind of bit of an issue with factors. So it was a really, really good interview.
Yeah, so I think 91 BC, like he was talking about, this is the kind of new sort of generation of factors. So traditionally quite stuffy, kind of same with a lot of solicitors. I think you'll get this where it's all letters and you've got to address everybody by their surname and all the rest of it. Now, he's saying that if you don't have a factor that has a portal where you can basically get the information happening in real time, where you know exactly what's going on with your building, the contractors that have been put out there, the invoices, everything's got to be transparent, basically. I think that's the key thing. So he goes into a lot of detail about that. We also talk about how to change your factors quite a lot as well. We go into that. What you can do if you're unhappy, what are the common things that people are complaining about, and just a kind of good, solid understanding about what a factor is and what they do.
Yeah, no, so without further ado, let's cut to the interview.
We are delighted to be joined by Doug MacSween from 91 BC Factoring Services. How you doing, Dougie?
Very well, guys. And you?
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us on this episode. And this is one that we've actually been trying to get somebody lined up for a wee while. And we thought, do you know what? There are so many people that slag off factors. And I just think that they get a bit of a bad rap sometimes. I'm in property management myself. And I understand that sometimes you're in it's a real difficult position. So we thought we'd get somebody like yourself to come on, defend factors, speak up for them. Let us know what's happening in the factoring industry. And we've got quite a few questions from our listeners' audience as well, so that'll be good.
It must be very similar to a letting agent. Like, you're kind of in a lose-lose situation with dealing with tenants going to hate on you, landlords going to hate on you. It must be one of those businesses quite a lot where you're just at the receiving end of the shit constantly.
What do you think, Dougie?
It's one step above traffic warden.
I would say, like, letting agents and factors are pretty much are there at the same kind of hated level. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm pretty much on your side, Dougie, although that, I can say that there are good and bad, like every industry, and we can touch on that as well and how things could be done better. So let's just jump into it then. Give us a little quick intro about who you are, Dougie, and how you got into this industry of factoring.
Okay, so I'm Doug McSween. I'm one of three partners in a company called 91 BC. How do we get into it? So I spent a lot of years in technology companies, and I have that as my background. That's kind of my thing, software. So about 2015, I bought a wee flat, and I was fixing it up, and the objective was to turn a profit on it, which it did. But something happened in that process where there was a major repair that the factory wanted to effect, and it was just taking forever. And there was a lot of communications back and forth with the community of owners in the building. A lot of it was on paper. It wasn't progressive in any way. And my partner and I, my now partner, decided that there was an opportunity to kind of enter the market as an aggressor, as a kind of shaker-upper. And we were going to do it through a piece of software, which we ultimately built, and it's called Community. And the whole objective really was to create a piece of software that would be marketed to property managers. And once we finished building it with a third partner, his name's Craig, we decided that, do you know what, let's just try and do this ourselves. So we launched 91BC in January 1st, 2016 with no customers. And it grew very quickly because of the tech angle. So consumer confidence was pretty much at an all-time low in factoring. As you've touched on already, it's just one step of a traffic warden, right? And you know, consumers want a more reductive approach to it. Reductive meaning you can achieve more by doing less. So if you can achieve through some keystrokes on your smartphone what would ordinarily be achieved through writing letters and waiting for responses, that would be a big difference. And that was our singular message when we took the product to market. And here we are now. We're in year 6, and we've created 17 jobs in the office. We've got a separate office now in Edinburgh, so one in Glasgow, one in Edinburgh. And it's just a healthy wee business. It's growing organically and very steadily.
That's really cool. And how many properties, how does it work in factoring? Do you call one property, is that like a block? How does it, how would you give the figures of how many properties you manage?
So they come in blocks, you're right. So a block could be anything from 4 tenement flats in a cottage type environment to an estate of several hundred. And we now manage, I think, 5,000-ish as of the last count. And it varies between, we're looking after 16th century listed property to estates of brand new houses that are going up. Because if you look at an estate, the way that houses are constructed now, they've invariably got a play park or a power supply or something else that's communal to the to development, and that all needs managed. And if you've got 275 owners all trying to manage that collectively, it's probably not going to work very well. Which is why you need a managing agent to facilitate all the things that have to happen in the background.
It's not really going to work if you decide to kind of share the grass cutting by the owners and you try and work out a system. So yeah.
No, it definitely wouldn't work. It would be chaotic.
What comes under the remit of a factor? Is it different levels of the service of what you provide, or is it, is it that's all, or is it very bespoke to the development?
So I think what the factor is required to do is completely dictated by the needs of the building or development in terms of its preservation. So, we're heavily involved at the moment in a couple of preservation projects that are part funded by public sector bodies, and those are the objective being that the building is preserved and its longevity is protected, and it's particularly a salient point in Glasgow because over half of us live in tenements, and tenements are made of sandstone, which is not a great building material. So the ones that are now 120 years old plus are starting to deteriorate, and that level of protection needs to be enhanced as the age of the building increases. So that's just your question. Yeah, factors do loads of stuff. Factors do cleaning of your communal area, but they'll also do long, complex, 6-figure projects that will effectively look after the building and protect its longevity. So everything that's required, including the insurance of the building, everything that's required to keep that building alive is the responsibility of the factor. Well, actually, I tell a lie. It's collectively the responsibility of the owners who live there. But the factor's job is to make that process a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier.
Manage that process. And so does the factor also cover the insurance of the buildings insurance then?
Yeah, so title deeds are pretty specific in terms of what you need to do with your building once you own it. And invariably, the title deed will specify whether or not the building has to be insured as one singular unit, which is called a block policy. Most tenements in Glasgow have it. It tends to vary by city to city. So in Edinburgh and Aberdeen, the rules tend to vary. You don't need to have a block policy on every tenement, but in Glasgow, invariably, you need one. And the purpose of that is,
Are these rules set by the council?
Sorry?
Are these rules set by the local council then, depending on if you do a factor, or is it?
They're set by the solicitor who writes the title deeds on day one.
Right.
So some of the ones.
Different cities got different rules then on.
It's behaviours.
Right.
Can't really explain why. So, like, our cities were created by the city fathers or the barons. So, like, most of Glasgow was built on tobacco, and those guys needed, housing for their vast amount of workers, and the local authorities and the city fathers put the tenements together, but they needed businesses to sit in the background in order to manage the communal responsibility of those buildings.
It's always been something I've wondered, because I know it's quite heavily not popular in Glasgow, but in Aberdeen, where I'm investing a lot, and it's it's not always the case. You've got a factor, and you have to kind of factor that into your cash flow, and a lot of them don't have it. So it's quite interesting to see the difference in the cities. Yeah,
it tends to be like cities like Aberdeen and Dundee. It tends to be law firms that provide factoring services. Although there are, most of the big factories have got a presence in all the big cities. But it just kind of depends on.
Would that be different now with like modern blocks that are going up? I mean, I presume that most of the new build and the modern blocks and that, they'll definitely have some sort of factors, will they?
Yeah, absolutely. From day one. So modern blocks have got things like lifts. There might be grounds that need maintained. There might be like play areas for the kids. So all that stuff needs to be, managed by a centralized service. Especially in city living, like new blocks that are going up in cities, a high population of those owners don't live there all the time. So that needs to be managed in a way that encompasses the transient population. So they don't want to be put upstairs, do they?
Just for the benefit of our listeners, because we get a lot of people who are investing in Scottish property from abroad or England and that, and they don't get the term factor, and quite often I think factor is quite a strange word. So what other terms that people might understand it a bit more, like property management companies, more of a letting agent that kind of, in England they call it is it the leaseholder? The company.
There's a different name for it in every geography. So in Scotland, particularly in the west of Scotland, we tend to call it the factor. But the generic term would be the property management agent. So I lived in South Africa for a few years, and they've got factors, but they call them the body corporate. Who knows why? Right. So every kind of geography's got a different term for it, but the generic term would be property management agent.
Right, okay. And did you not manage to get the domain name sackyourfactor.com or something like that?
No. No, we do own changeyourfactor.com, which is quite useful.
Right, okay.
Because it's the kind of term that people, especially during the last 18 months when people are all at home, people have got time to think, and and they're getting together as groups of neighbours on Zoom. And people have got opportunities to, gather signatures and facilitate meetings. So the changing of the factor has been quite a kind of hot topic for homeowners.
Yeah, we'll get onto that later on, because that's one of the questions. But so and a lot of people you talk to are like, oh, I don't need a factor. I can do it better myself. Obviously, some blocks are self-managing, and there's a lot of real negativity against factors. Now, I can see it from both sides. I would say you know, that works fine if it's a block of maybe 6 or 8 tenement flats, you know, where they're all owner occupied and you've got everybody who's clubbed together in a group, and, you know, the communication's good with all the neighbours, you know, and they go out and they mingle in the back court and all the rest of it, and they all know each other. But the minute you have, like, you know, landlords that are living abroad and owners that are all over the place and renting out properties and stuff like that, generally that's where I believe that a factor really comes into its own. I mean, I've got a couple of flats in Glasgow that are unfactored, and it's an absolute nightmare. I mean, I'll have a word to you later about them and see if you can help out. But you know, like, it's coming back on me because the tenant's complaining, like, you know, the grass is an absolute mess at the back. Can we get somebody in to cut the grass? So then I'm having to organise a gardener to come in, and then I've got to try and recoup the money from the other owners, you know, and it's like, you know, it's pennies. It's like £6. So it's not even worth my while, you know, to go round everybody and ask for the £6. So then I'm out of pocket, and it just becomes an absolute headache. So tell us, that there's a little case study, if you like, but tell us, you know, why is it a good idea to have a factor, and you know, what are the most common issues that start kind of appearing when people don't have factors, sort of thing?
Well, what I would say, first of all, if you've got a collaborative, joined up group of owners, self-factoring is brilliant. And the reason for that is you can work at your own pace, you can make decisions as a group that will be, you know, wholesale. If you've got a group of owners that all wish the best for the building or the development, self-factoring is great. And if you've got a person who's a effective treasurer, a natural chairperson, that's a great idea. If you don't have that, you need a facilitator. And the reason for that is because you're going to get situations where people won't agree on everything, especially if you've got absent landlords who just want, you know, a regular income stream, recognizable revenue, and a maximized profit. So they're probably not going to want to build a barbecue area in the back of their development. They just want tenancies that are reliable with maximized profit. So in standard situations, you'll need a factor to act as the facilitator, the middleman, the proposer, the gatherer of the funds, the person who will be liable. So that's a big point as well. You know, sometimes we do a job and we're doing an annual gutter inspection and repair, and that costs a few quid. And the reason for that is because you need 2 roofers, right? You need liability if something goes wrong. And you know, a common objection is, my uncle's got a ladder. He could have gone up and replaced that slate for £4.50. But what if he drops the slate off the roof? What if he hits a car? What if he falls off the roof himself? What if he kills someone? So, like, all of these things need to be covered, and the owners have to be protected against the liability, and make sure their indemnity is protected. So the job of the factor is, if you've not got a joined up group of owners, if you need a facilitator, things will happen provided you as a group of owners want them to. And I think that's quite an important point to make. So you're an example you've just given, your garden's a mess. Why is it a mess? Is it because the owners can't be bothered doing it? Nobody can be bothered facilitating it. Nobody wants to pay for it. All of those things need to be addressed by a singular organising body, and that's the factor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
How factors, like, how do they generally charge a factor? Like, how is it? I'm assuming it's kind of based on the amount of the and is it rolled up yearly divided by the owners? How can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so I think historically factors have charged for things way in arrears. And this is something that we couldn't get our head around when we started the company, because contractors weren't paid on 30 days terms. And if owners were only paying their factoring fees quarterly or half yearly, you know, your factor's going to have a cash flow deficit that will be crippling to any business. So, in answer to your question, like, the way we've constructed it is a wee bit different. So everything we do is on a smart device. And we've got this web application called Community. So, and when things happen in your building, you can see your invoice developing in real time. And at the end of the month, almost all of our customers pay us online anyway, but at the end of the month, you can see what's happened and what you can expect to pay for and what will that amount be. And then in 14 days time, the money will come out of your bank account, and that allows customers to, question, we are human, mistakes happen. So that allows customers to question things that they don't agree with, or in some cases, we've forgotten to charge something because the contractor's not presented us with a PDF invoice on time, and it's not appeared on their invoice, so they might get questions on that. So any disparity or anomaly is identifiable at the end of the month. So the answer to your question, things happen, contractors are paid, then customers pay the factor, and that's the flow of the cash.
And what would you be roughly looking at price-wise for, can you give a couple of examples, maybe like a one-bed house or a new build house in a new development?
Yeah, so lumping everything together, so the factor will probably charge you anywhere between £10 and £15 a month for the service per owner. Most factors will be VAT registered, so you need to pay 20% on top of that. So then things like insurance. So the basic rule of thumb, when you're looking for value in an insurance policy, you should only really be paying £1 for every £1,000 of sum insured. That's the target. Okay. So if you're building, the cost to reinstate it is say 2 million. So your insurance policy should be about £2,000 for the year. You divide that amongst the individual properties within the building or development, and they pay their share of that. And then you've got things like cleaning, grounds maintenance. You might have an intercom system that needs power. You might have a lighting system. So some of those are supplied by the local authority. They're really cheap. The ones that are not supplied by a local authority are supplied by utility companies. They tend to be more expensive. So look, an average factoring bill, probably about £50 a month for a tenement, all in. But it varies.
And aside from your management like fees, obviously, I mean, you don't need to go into too much detail, but what are the other kind of revenue streams for factors that is it, I've heard quite common is to mark up like insurance, or they get some sort of kickback or something like that. Is that a common thing?
Yeah, that's very common. So I'll give you our example, and then I'll tell you what I know about the industry. So like we make our money on our management fee. We make a referral fee on insurance, but we don't mark up on it. And we've now got a project team that is responsible for delivering large-scale works, and they charge a proportion of the overall cost. So we've just finished rescuing a tenement that was going to be condemned because it was falling into the earth in G42. I won't tell you anything else. So that particular project was over £150,000, and it had to be executed very quickly. And there's a chartered professional who's responsible for signing off on the job to ensure that it's warranted. So that process was a complex project, and we charge a fee for that. So in terms of our revenue streams, we make money on our management fee, get a referral on the insurance, and our project team is probably our major cash cow, because that's a specialised skill.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's fair enough. I think the problem arises when people find out these things when they're not really made aware of them. But the way that you're being quite transparent, I know transparency is one of your key objectives and one of your kind of reasons for setting up 91BC. You've spoken to me about it before and stuff. So, what more can you do? As long as you're upfront with people, then they can't really come back to you and start complaining.
Yeah, totally. So look, marking up on jobs, you have to disclose. And if you are getting a rebate from a contractor, or if you are making money on a piece of work that you're charging out greater than the cost to you. So for example, I'm not explaining this very well. So if, for example, a roof repair is conducted by a contractor, they charge £5,000 for it. If you charge the owner £6,000 for that, you've got to tell them. Mm-hmm. And that disclosure is a key component of the factor's code of conduct, and you cannot break it. So,
yeah,
you know, our policy is not to mark up, because we've got distinct revenue streams in the other three areas, and you know, it kind of keeps the whole thing a bit more competitive, a bit slicker.
yeah. That's a good point. Sorry,
Steve.
Stephen.
Why factors get a bad name, do you?
Factors get a bad name because they were left alone to do what they want for the first 100 years of the industry. So look, the industry is changing very, very quickly. So I think there was a perception in the market that factors are slow to react and very bureaucratic, not very flexible, terrible at communicating. All of these things are no longer tolerated. And I talked about the reductive approach earlier on. The reductive approach is everything in factory at the moment. So if consumers can achieve more by doing less, that allows them to have a greater confidence in the service provider, and effectively will make things happen in a more effective way. So it's about reduction, it's about progression, it's about lifestyle-based service provision. So like all this carry on about you can't touch your factor after 5 p.m, you can't have a conversation on a weekend, that's all nonsense. That's completely substandard. And you know, our message from the get-go was we're a 7 days business, we're digital. We're able to react quickly because we are digital, and we don't use paper. So at the moment, we're running on less than 4% of all transactions are touching paper. And those are really for, you know, retired people and stuff who want a paper bill. That's okay, they can have a paper bill, provided we sit below that KPI of 5%, we'll be satisfied. So that's your question, why do factors get a bad name? Because of the historical behaviours. And those historical behaviours are no longer tolerated. You know, a generation is dying off. We're all digital now. Everyone's interested in making things happen quickly in a reductive fashion. And you know, that's why the old guard are shaping up to, you know, to join the revolution, so to speak.
And if someone wasn't happy with their factor, how easy is it to change it, and what would be the process to go about doing it?
It's pretty easy. So, like the key to having a smooth factor switch is having a group of owners who are in communication. So, if you've got a committee in a building, say you've got a tenement of 12 flats, right? A committee in there has to reach out to all the owners and at least ask them to register their approval to switch their factor. Most title deeds specify that you need to have a meeting. So meetings now are different. They don't have to be in a room with a room full of people. You can have a virtual meeting, much like this one. You can have a meeting on WhatsApp, you know, so that counts as a meeting. And provided your meeting is quorate, if you've got a quorum, the required amount of people to make a decision, you can then serve your termination to the existing factor and appoint a new one in exactly the same way. So,
and what percentage need to agree on that?
Sorry?
What percentage of the owners need to agree on that?
Generally 51%.
Right.
A simple majority. In some cases, it's less than that. In some cases, it's more. But it's a general majority is the rule of thumb.
And the key to it is obviously look into your. Oh, hang on. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, perfectly.
All right, sorry. The key is obviously in your title deeds, right? So that would be the first place to look for people if they want to try and
yeah,
change
absolutely.
factors.
So look, title deeds can be quite complicated in their wording, especially ones that are from prior to 1989. So the Register of Scotland was digitised in 1989. So everything post that date is pretty easy to understand. But some of them are what's called sasines, and that's the old style of title deed. And some of them are handwritten. So those can be hard to interpret. So I think my message to anyone who's interested in switching is give us a call. We can interpret your titles for you, and effectively write you a prescription of what to do next if you want to make a switch.
Yeah, sounds good. And that actually answered a couple of questions that Nick had asked on our Facebook group. One of them was actually asking about what advice for changing factor.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll just jump in here because we obviously put a post out to our group members, and it's great to get a bit of feedback from the community. So we've got if I can just pick you out about the one specifically related to changing factor. It's from Robert Ralston. He said, "What is involved in changing factor?" Obviously, you've just described a little bit about the process there. He said, "I have heard obstacles being put up, for example, meetings with the representatives being deemed necessary, but then also being deemed billable hours, whereby you effectively have to pay them to attend. What is reasonable and what is not, and clarity on what steps to expect when looking to change factors." So what about this kind of meetings and billable hours?
Never heard of that. So
Yeah.
first of all, if you as a group of owners are having a meeting about your building, it's no one else's business apart from yours. So, and if you're having a meeting about the factor, you probably don't want to invite the factor to it if you're talking about them.
Yeah.
So the point about resistance is quite an important one, because an appointed factor has a responsibility to look after a building, right? That's the purpose of them, being appointed. So if that termination is not legitimate, it puts the factor at risk of leaving some of those owners in the lurch who are not expecting to switch factor. So quite often you get, one really angry person in a tenement close who wants to switch out the factor, and then they've had a cursory discussion with some guys in the tenement close, and then they might serve termination to the factor, and half the people who live there don't know anything about it. So the factor is absolutely justified in resisting that termination. That's not a proper termination because it puts the factor at risk. It might involve, the ending of an insurance policy that covers the building, and the factor cannot do that. It's their job to look after the building. Even if people don't pay their bills, it's still the factor's job to do it, and they can't accept the termination unless it's legitimate. So yeah, there's a bit of that in the industry, to be honest, Stephen, but in most cases, the factor is justified in refusing the termination. But I know of cases as well where the factor has just said, "Nah, we didn't get your letter," or "We don't believe that you had a meeting," just all that nonsense. So that's not acceptable. I think there's a set of rules you have to follow, and if you as a group of owners follow those rules correctly, you'll be able to make a switch.
Yeah.
And it is easy.
The comments that Nick had got from the group, actually, and I knew this would be a debate with owners and investors and landlords are going to see factors from a different point of view. So we'll kind of read some out because a couple of them have got a question on it. We'll start with Sinling Law. She's obviously a client of yours because says, "I use 91 BC and they're fab," and she wanted to ask you how you came up with the system you use because it's great, and do most factors use a system of owners logging in and voting on issues, and what happens to the issues it doesn't get voted to be fixed?
Okay, so I'm glad we got some positive feedback. That's great. I'll dig out that customer's details when I get back to my desk and ping her a thank you note. So our
Ping her
system,
a £20 note.
Do you know what? So to answer a question about our system, so our business is kind of back to front because we started as a software company, and we only became a factor effectively by mistake, because we started using our own software to provide the services that it was engineered to make smooth. So how does our system work? So it's a three-way dynamic interaction. So you've got administrators, customers, contractors, all talking at the same time on a protected forum. So people write comments on, they've got to be approved in case there's like bad language or anything defamatory on there, but that happens very, very quickly. So process flow would be, if you're a customer of ours and you want to have something conducted at your building in terms of a job, so you might stick on a comment that says, "New maintenance request, my roof's leaking." Everybody in the building will then see that. And then the comments from our administrators will then become visible as well. So as soon as we assign the job to one of our team, and then as soon as that job is assigned to a contractor, the contractor then also logs in and will add commentary to the job as it happens. when they arrive on site, they've got a check-in. So you can see the job being updated. You've got a flag on your smartphone that says, contractor who is doing job number blah, 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 has arrived on site. And then as the job progresses through and invoices are created, those are uploaded in a non-editable format, like a PDF, so nobody can change them. And that effectively drives the creation of the line item on the invoice, which is then presented at month end. But you can see it happening in real time. So our system was built on that very basic principle. It's about real-time communication. And that's what didn't exist in factoring when we had the idea. You know, it's starting to change now. I think most of our competitors have got some sort of online portal. Although I'm pretty confident in saying nobody can do what we can do in terms of the dynamic, real-time communication and data updates. That's something that, you know, we're really into.
That.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We're fiercely proud of it.
Can we touch on? Can we touch on just quickly before we move on to the next question? You mentioned previously about unpaid bills from owners and debt. That must be a huge thing. We've got a couple of flats in various different developments around Glasgow where we were just really struggling to get anything done in terms of, you know, door entry systems getting upgraded and all the rest of it. And you know, what happens is you get a lot of people, you know, on the Facebook groups and stuff like that saying the factors are terrible, doing absolutely nothing and all the rest of it. But I do kind of like understand, because obviously with big repair bills like that, you know, the money's not just going to like magic out of thin air. It's got to be paid. So unless they've got, you know, they've got like a certain cut off, I think it was like £400 or something like that, where they've agreed with the owners to go ahead and do it, and then they'll recoup that money. But if it's over a certain level, then they need that money in up front. So I can understand that. Is that a big issue? Like, you know, what can be done in terms of owners that are paying the factors fees? You know, because there's a lot of good owners out there who want to get things done, who want to maintain the building. It seems really unfair.
It is unfair. It's completely unfair. But there are things that can be done. So I'll touch on the debt piece first of all, right? So you as a group of owners in your building are collectively responsible for its upkeep. And if you've appointed a factor to do that for you, the factor then charges you for the works that have happened, okay? And because it's a collective responsibility, if there are owners who don't pay their share, the factor is then allowed to charge that share to the rest of the owners. It's not a practice that we do, but they can only do that provided that they can demonstrate that they've exhausted all of the debt management process. So going through the courts, etc., trying to recoup the cash. So yes, debt in factoring is a problem, much less so for modern businesses because we're digital and most of our customers pay us on time automatically. And that, you know, takes away half of the cash flow challenges. So you'll note that the principle you've mentioned there is called the authority to act. So you're allowed to spend a specific amount of money, which is either specified in the title or agreed by the group of owners at the point of the arrangement starting. And to allow that to happen, most factors will collect a floating charge at the start of the arrangement. And this could be anything between, you know, like modern developments, the float can be anything up to 500 quid, but usually it's about £100. And that cash is used to facilitate repairs from the outset so that there's no adverse cash ratio bouncing back on the factor. But there is something else that you can do. So if you've got a project at your building which is critical to its preservation, there's a scheme called the missing share scheme, and every local authority has one. So the factor can approach the council and say, we've got 8 owners here, we've collected you know, £70,000 for this job, there's 10 outstanding from one owner, we need you to help us get that money. And then in some cases the council will pay the bill and then chase down the owner for that sum of money. And it's a brilliant resource. And you know, it's not used often, we haven't had to use it often, but when we have done, it's been, a very seamless and effective, swift process. So yeah, there are things you could do. So
I've heard of certain instances like where you've stepped in as well. I don't know whether you've facilitated this or the owners have, but in terms of like grants, local authority grants available as well.
Yeah.
On older buildings. I think that's quite common in Glasgow for like some of the old tenement buildings and things like that.
I think when we last discussed the factor, Nick, I remember telling you about one of the ones I've got in Aberdeen on Union Street, and the factoring's fee for applying for the local council grant was 15 grand plus VAT to send the application in to try and get the grant. And I thought, and that was why we were discussing about factors and why they get the bad name. I'm thinking that was one of the reasons with fees like that.
Right.
Yeah, look, that's not good value. Your factors should be doing that as part of the management fee.
Yeah.
There's a bit of work involved, but in some buildings, they just tick along, and the owners are happy. The work gets done, and the management fee is almost like a nice to have. In some buildings, we're working like solidly every day.
Well, that's it, and we've had a few comments, obviously in support of fact. I thought there'd be a heck of a lot more negative ones, to be honest with you, but there seems to be quite a few positive ones. Like Neil Robbs said, he would rather have a factor than other owners who refuse to maintain, sort of thing. Because at the end of the day, right, we're buying assets. Our investments, if they're not looked after, if they're not maintained, they are going to drop in value. This is the argument that I have with a lot of the other owners and blocks that I have where they're not paying. They just don't get it. They just want to save that, 50, 60 pound a month, at the kind of detriment of the whole building and everybody's assets going down.
Aye, I know exactly. So, look, I think that the perception of the factor community is changing a wee bit. I think in the last decade, it started to redeem itself. The industry started to redeem itself. And
it's funny because we have got a bit of a balance. Like we've got a couple of really experienced investors and landlords who've been doing it a long time with big portfolios, and they're completely 50-50. They're either against it or they're drawn. So like Neil Robbs, an active member in the community, he says that he would rather have a factor any time rather than landlords refuse to maintain. But then you've got Alex Walker, who's got, he's got phenomenal houses in his portfolio, but he says they're like wheel clampers. He says factor companies are like wheel clampers. They made illegal in Scotland due to their poor service and basically ripping off the public. All factoring companies should be banned. Should take over. So you've got completely.
Yeah, I know.
Aye.
Yeah, like sometimes I'm almost embarrassed to say what we do.
When you're at a party, Dougie, when somebody asks you, do you just make something up?
I tell them I'm a spaceman normally.
You've got the wheel clampers and the traffic wardens, so yeah. I mean, I do feel, because like before I actually became a letting agent myself and I understood what it was like to be that kind of middleman, I used to be guilty of phoning up factors and giving them some abuse, I've got to say. And now I'm actually quite ashamed to say that, I can see it from the other side now.
Yeah, I know.
And I think this chat's helped as well, because we had a debate recently, Nick, on a Facebook Live we've done on the group, and where someone asked about factors, and me and you were complete like opposite ends yet. You agreed with them, you thought they were great. I wasn't used to them until I kind of came to Aberdeen, and the ones that I have had experience with were pretty bad, so I was kind of on the dead against it. But listening to Dougie's chat, obviously answering the questions and understanding how the business or his business works, I think this will help a lot of landlords kind of get clarity on how factoring is changing, and good quality, transparent companies like Dougie's are out there.
Yeah, look, it's all about the tech. Everything's about tech. And a letter writing business isn't going to deliver good value, and isn't going to, keep customers satisfied. I've got
to get on board with that soon as well.
I know. I've got a wee flat that I've had the same factor in since I've owned it, which is forever. And those guys, you have to address them by their surname. They don't have a Christian name. And it's like, they won't let you know that.
I think it's about the relationship between the owners as well, and that's automatically putting up a barrier straight away.
Yeah, I know.
I think we'll
Yeah,
just finish off. We've got one last comment from Facebook here, and then we'll wrap up. But Paul Clark, he's got a couple of comments more than a question, but he said if he can offer any advice, it is change to the new generation of factors. So we've touched on that with the tech side of things there. That are now available. The large factors have had it their way for many decades. This has bred a malaise amongst them as they believe it's their divine right to manage your property. They offer exorbitant insurance costs to which they have a financial interest and gain, which contradicts their statement of efficacy and transparency. Once they have your site and there's a movement of owners and landlords, it becomes difficult to extract them. It's my firm belief that all factored sites should be opened up to open competitive tender every 3 to 5 years. This would drive down costs and increase competition and stop factors hiding behind the information that they possess. That's quite interesting, isn't it, about the tendering?
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you know what? It doesn't even need to be that robust a process. I think so anyone can switch their factor. You don't need to wait 3 or 5 years. If you appoint a new factor and 4 weeks later you're dissatisfied, you can get rid of them right away. So factors don't put contracts on customers unless it's a brand new development, in which case the factor is usually written into the titles for the first 3 or 5 years, or in some cases until the last unit is sold. But you know, there's so much flexibility and competition now in the industry that the 3 or 5 year tender process, you don't even need it. If you as a group of owners are not satisfied after a short period of time with a factor you've appointed, you can fire them right away, and that's needed. I think where the industry has given itself a bad reputation historically is that there was this behaviour that it's in a title deed. You've got to pay us every month. You've got to do you've got to follow a path prescribed by the factor. None of that's true.
Like a lot. Yeah, like they've got you over a barrel sort of thing. Yeah, well, like you say, it can change, and also you've got now, owners have got the power now of actually making complaints via the housing tribunal, right? Because you've got got the code of conduct. You can now launch a complaint via the court system.
Yeah, you can. It's a little bit laborious. So you can only do that provided you've exhausted the complaints procedure with the factor, and that complaints procedure has to be laid out in the terms of service from your factor. So you can't just go to the tribunal and say, I hate this guy, he's not doing very much for me. It needs to be process driven, and provided that you've exhausted those steps, you can then raise a claim in the tribunal, and they'll hear it. They hear every single one. And it's unpleasant for factors to go through, so they don't want to have to, you have to turn up in court, you have to put a suit on. You might have to get a lawyer.
And I've actually heard of, there was a case recently actually where a factor got struck off. I can't remember, we'll not name names or anything like that, but there was definitely one that got struck off the register there.
Yeah.
So
it was debate. That was debate in Hollywood, that particular example.
Right.
And they were very naughty.
Right. Okay. Yeah, well, if people want to know that one, I'm sure you can just Google factors that have been struck off the register, and you'll probably come up with a news story, because it was in the press quite a bit as well. But anyway, Dougie, that's been absolutely brilliant. I think it's provided a good, solid, balanced debate. I think you've been brilliant in kind of giving it both sides as well. You said, you're actually a landlord yourself, and you've got a couple of properties, so you kind of see it as well from that side of it. Do you want to just give us quickly where people can contact you, and if they're interested in looking at obviously 91 BC, what can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing you should do is punch in change your factor into Google, and you will find 91 BC. Our web address is 91bc.uk. You can phone us. There's a phone number on there. Our phones are always manned, including the weekends. And, even if it's just for some impartial advice, we know a lot about this, and, we can have a conversation with you about it. If you think there's an opportunity to get 91BC involved in your building, delighted to. Just, we like talking about it.
Great stuff.
Right, Dougie. Thanks for joining us today. It's actually been quite insightful for me as well.
You're entirely welcome.
So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I know it certainly changed my perspective on factors, and Dougie was clear and precise on what they've done and what service kind of their business offers and the way the industry is going. So, I think it's very positive for factors, and it looks after your building and maintains your building for a long term, and it deals with a mixture of owners and owner-occupiers and investors that maybe live abroad, don't live in the property. So it is good to have that factor in place. I do see the light. My opinion has changed, I think, from this interview. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, no, good. So let's just say to people, hope you're getting good value as always from the podcast. And if you've got a wee minute and you've got Instagram, then take a quick screenshot, tag myself and Stephen in it, and we'll put it out to our followers as well. And make sure you're a member of the Facebook group, the Scottish Property Podcast Facebook group, because we put a lot of stuff on there as well. And thanks very much for all your support as always, guys. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks a lot, guys.